In tonight's Technology Insider, software concerns for the Joint Strike Fighter. The F-35 was designed to fly with the help of a $16.7 billion software program. It's called ALICE, short for Autonomous Logistics Information System. According to the Government Accountability Office, problems with ALICE are so severe they could take the entire fleet offline. Joining me with the latest is Patrick Tucker, technology editor for Defense One. Patrick, tell me more about ALICE and the problems that exist.
Well, it's been the subject of a lot of different reports, a lot of different pieces of scrutiny by the government, by auditors, and it is an enormous program that charts parts, charts different repairs that are done to the system. And one of the big problems that's historically been the case with it is that it's very difficult for humans to override. This was made really clear by an excellent 60-minute segment that showed that humans trying to tell ALICE that a particular part had been installed, the program is basically arguing with them and telling them no, that it hadn't. So it's been the subject of a lot of frustration for the Pentagon. They coincidentally say that the problems with the system, while they do acknowledge that they still exist, are probably not severe enough to actually ground the plane, because all of the F-35s can fly without ALICE for about 30 days, but that's not a terribly long period of time.
I'm telling you, this is like the computer HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey. What are you doing, Patrick? Don't do that. I mean, it's crazy. Right. The F-35 is a flying computer. All right, the GAO hinted at a possible grounding. How did the Pentagon respond?
They say that a grounding is not going to happen, that the Air Force remains on track to declare initial operating capability for the F-35 this year, and that's a really significant milestone for this program. The Marines declared initial operating capability last year, but that wasn't seen as really a test of exactly how combat ready this plane is, because that was done in a very austere environment. It was really more of a test of the plane and not so much all of the different supporting systems. So if the Air Force is able to declare IOC this year, that initial operating capability, that's going to be a much bigger test. They say they're on track to meet it. They say that they've also changed the way that they go about releasing updates or patches to problems with ALICE, so pushing those out on a much more regular basis in a sort of a la carte way to different operators working with different planes in different places, and that they think is going to help everybody implement workarounds to problems with ALICE much faster. So they say there's nothing new in this report, nothing we haven't seen, and we're still on track.
Wow, it's a beautiful airplane, as we see there. Okay, you're also following the Senate's Compliance with Court Orders Act of 2016. Is this an encryption bill? What's in it?
It is seen as an encryption bill, and what it says is that technology companies have to comply with court orders in such a way that when law enforcement asks them for help to read information that's stored on digital devices that those companies manufacture, the companies have to help them. And it's an encryption bill because end-to-end user encryption, which is something that Apple and Google and other companies are increasingly standardizing across their product line, doesn't allow the companies that make that device, that technology, or that service to break in and gather that data and then give it to law enforcement. So they're essentially shortcutted out of having to obey the court order because they don't have the technical means to do it. Now, technologists will tell you that end-to-end user encryption is something that makes data safer for everybody, data transfer safer for everybody, helps passwords stay secure. It's part of the backbone of the next era of the internet, because in order for the internet to continue to grow, all that data in transfer has to be secure. This bill says you can't devise a system, a technology, or a service that you can't access if we give you a court order. The technology community is saying this is an absolutely terrible bill. We're not exactly sure what the White House thinks of it. There's been some reporting that suggests that they aren't fully on board with it, but it's right now, depending on who supports it and how, we're gonna know how that shakes out.
Now, Patrick, China adopted similar legislation last year. How do these two measures compare?
This is an interesting point. Yes, the Chinese government originally, at the beginning of 2014, was working on a bill that would compel companies to basically give the government of China the keys to any encryption service or device that they were using. There was a lot of lobbying by technology companies and even the United States government to walk them back from that. And so finally, China settled on a different version of that same legislation that forces companies to help the Chinese authorities when they're seeking access to information, but they wouldn't have to necessarily give those keys to the Chinese government directly. So that resembles this new legislation to a strange and sort of uncanny degree. Now, what that means for a company, for instance, like Apple, which sees China as its #1 and definitely most important product growth market for the future, is that they're going to start being squeezed from both sides if this bill passes. On the one hand, you've got their largest market, which would say, according to this new law, you can't design any system that you can't break into. You have to help us if we demand that you help us to break into different devices, get information. And U.S. law would say basically the same thing. So between those two, that rock and that hard place, technology companies would have a really hard time continuing to offer end-to-end user encryption.
Yeah, it's very, very tough to even think about giving the Chinese the key to anything.
Right.
All right, before you go, let's talk about the hypersonic missile. You write that the U.S. is pouring money into hypersonic research that's making countries like China and Russia nervous. Bring us up to date.
So the budget for hypersonic research basically doubled in the most recent presidential budget request. This is something that the Pentagon has said that they're very interested in developing some sort of missile that can travel at between Mach 10 and Mach 20, depending on which design is used. And the goal eventually is to get to some sort of kind of a reusable aircraft by 2030 that can do information, intelligence, and reconnaissance, and a fully refurbishable takes off, lands, you can use it over and over again, hypersonic airplane by the year 2040. Now, some in the non-proliferation community, some physicists, and even former Defense Secretary William Perry have said that this is a inherently destabilizing technology because it can really only be used for one thing, and that's in the event of a nuclear war.
And that's my next question. What does the phrase first strike have to do with all this discussion?
Well, so there's, in the event of hostilities, there's a military buildup, there's different planes that, take off and land from different places. A hypersonic missile or even an airplane can really only have one strategic value, and that is that it can either drop a nuclear payload in the event of a first strike, or it can take out an adversary's secondary strike capability, take out their missiles, which is also just a first strike capability. So the Pentagon has been really adamant, despite a lot of rumors. They don't tend to put a nuclear warhead on the missile that they're developing. They are really adamant about that. But you could still use it to take out an adversary's nuclear weapons capability. And the only real purpose of such a program is to do just that, to all of a sudden send a lot of hypersonic pieces of equipment really fast across a continent, because you're now involved in a thermonuclear conflict. So even if it doesn't have a nuclear warhead on it, because it's only useful to take out an enemy's nuclear weapons, that makes it a inherently destabilizing technology in the minds of a lot in the non-proliferation community, a lot of physicists, and even a former Defense Secretary.
Wow, we've covered a lot of territory. Patrick Tucker, technology editor for Defense One. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.